What's up, everybody? Mr. Forrest back with another episode of Big Truths. Guys, I am so excited about what we're going to learn this week. Our big truth for the week answers the question, who is Jesus? Say it with me if you remember, the eternal Son of God who came in the flesh. Let's jump right into it. I love a good mystery. A few weeks ago, I was out visiting my dad in California, and I got a book from one of his shelves. It was a mystery novel, and I couldn't put it down. Immediately, I was captivated. Immediately, I was enthralled. The author was so skilled, I couldn't wait to find out what happened next. It was hard for me ever to put the book down. I finished it in like 2 days. And it's like this roller coaster ride where the whole time I'm wondering, who did it? Why did they do it? How did they do it? And all along, I'm like, I bet it was him. No. It must have been her. And then there was something totally satisfying at the end. When the author put it all together, solved all the pieces, I sat back and said, that's who did it. That's how they did it. That's why they did it. And I sat back and sighed like this. This sigh of satisfaction, knowing that the puzzle had been solved, the mystery had been resolved. Today, we're going to look at a mystery. But at the end of the preaching time, the mystery is not going to be resolved. And the puzzle is not going to be solved. And we're not going to sit back in sigh, in satisfaction that we know how it all fits together and now it all makes sense. Instead, we're going to sit back in awe and marvel at the greatness of the mystery. Let's take a look at what that mystery is. 1 Timothy 3:16. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. He was manifested in the flesh, vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up into glory. The mystery is this, that God became human. Now, so let's put on our Sherlock Holmes hats today and let's investigate this mystery. And let's begin investigating this mystery by turning in our Bibles to John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with the Word. The first part, the introduction to this mystery is this. God always existed. Those first 3 words in John 1:1, in the beginning, take our minds back to another book of the Bible that begins with the exact same words, in the beginning. Do you know what that book is? It's the book of Genesis. It takes our minds all the way back to when God created the very first thing that he created. Time. The Bible says, in the beginning. You see, God existed before there was even time. Which absolutely and totally boggles my mind, this mystery that God always existed. It boggles my mind to think back, well, what was it like 80 skillion years ago before God created time or anything else? Where did God exist? Because space didn't exist because he didn't create space. So where did he exist? And it just blows my mind. Is the kind of thing that could keep me up at night. You see, God existed before time. God existed before he created light. God existed before he created sky or the land or the sea or the trees or the bushes. God existed before he created the sun, the moon, the stars, and galaxies. God existed before he made the fish or the birds. We like going to the zoo, and the closest zoo to my house is called the Elmwood Zoo. And when we go, we like looking at the jaguars, and we like looking at the eagles and the bison. And there's like this critter lodge. I don't know what to call it, but there's like insects and arachnids and snakes in there. Basically all the creepy crawly things. And we go through there and it's dark in there and it's kind of creepy. And we like to take a little stick or a little twig that we find and sneak it in there. And when my wife's looking at something like a giant cockroach, she's staring at it. We use it and we tickle the back of her neck with it, and she freaks out and screams and runs out. It's really fun. But God existed before he created the jaguars and the eagles and the bison and the creepy crawly things. God existed before he made people. You see, God always existed. That's a mystery that I can't figure out with my human brain. It absolutely blows my mind. He always existed. But if we adjust our Sherlock Holmes hats and dig a little deeper, we'll see the second part of this mystery. And that's found in verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So you see, there was never a moment when Jesus became God. Jesus was always God. He always existed. But there was a moment when Jesus became human. Buckle up, because this is another thing that I can't get my mind around, and my mind just blows thinking about it. God, who fills the universe, who is everywhere at the same time, became a single cell so small it cannot be seen with the human eye. It has to be seen under a microscope. That single cell inside a woman's tummy named Mary. God, who always existed, who fills the universe, lived inside a woman's tummy for 9 months. God, who, as we learned last year, exists apart from anything else, who needs absolutely nothing, needed nutrients from the umbilical cord, from the food that Mary ate. God, who always existed, was born. God, who knows everything, had to cry to notify his mom that he was hungry. The God who needs nothing had to breathe air and blink his eyes because his eyes were dry and needed moisture, who needed milk and to be burped and to be changed and to be carried by his mom, who had to learn to walk and to talk and had to learn the craft of carpentry. Now, the God the architect who designed and constructed the universe, imagine him sitting in Joseph's workshop learning to make a chair. This is a mystery I can't figure out. Let's take it one step further. We like watching this movie called The Incredible Mr. Limpet. And in the movie The Incredible Mr. Limpet, Don Knotts plays a man named Mr. Limpet, who hates his life, but he loves his fish. In fact, he loves his fish so much that he wished that he was one. And one day, him and his wife and his friend went to Coney Island, and he was looking over the pier and looking over the railing, and he said these words, I wish I were a fish. He ends up falling over the railing into the water and becoming a fish. And in the movie, as a fish, he can go anywhere he wants. He feels absolute freedom. He can do whatever he wants. He can communicate with other fish and other aquatic creatures. In the movie, he even becomes the hero of World War II by communicating with the United States Navy where the German submarines are. But in this movie, when Mr. Limpet becomes a fish, he's no longer Mr. Limpet. He's now a fish. He's not a human anymore. He's a human who became a fish, but he's not a human anymore. But that's not how Jesus is. It's not like Jesus is God and then he became a human and he stopped being God. Jesus is God who became human, but he never stopped being God. It's like we learned at Epic Bible Fun this summer. When Jesus came, he was 100% God and 100% human. The math doesn't add up. How do I figure it out? Guys, this is a mystery that we sit back and we marvel at its greatness. God always existed. That's a mystery. God became human. That's a mystery. And God lived in our neighborhood. Take a look again at verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwelt is like he pitched his tent among us. He tabernacled among us. And John's taking our minds back to the book of Exodus. And you guys remember where the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt, and God brought them out of Egypt by striking 10 powerful knockout blows against Pharaoh. And he brought the people out through the Red Sea and into the desert, where they lived for 40 years in tents or in tabernacles. And the whole time God led them by a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. And when the pillar of fire or cloud would move, they would pack up their tabernacles, their tents, and they would move. And then when it would stop, they'd pitch their tents or their tabernacles. And in the middle of their tents was God's tabernacle. Right in the middle, and the 12 tribes of Israel surrounded this tabernacle with their little tents. And this tabernacle is where the presence of God dwelt among his people. But it was surrounded by a high fence with only one entrance. And the people only went there to offer their sacrifices. They bring their sacrifices to the brazen altar, and the priest would take the sacrifice and offer the sacrifice, and the person would leave. And only the priests were in there on a regular basis. And in the tabernacle was a place called the Holy Place. And then inside the Holy Place was a place called the Most Holy Place. And that Most Holy Place was a cube, 15 feet high and 15 feet deep and 15 feet wide. And inside the Most Holy Place was the Ark of the Covenant. And that's where they kept the stone tablets that had the 10 Commandments on them. And it was separated from the rest of the tabernacle by a really thick curtain. So you see, the tabernacle was basically separated from all of the people by this tall wall all around it. And then, even separated from the priest, was the most holy place, separated by a thick curtain. And the only person that was allowed inside was the high priest. And he almost always only went in there once a year. And if anybody else tried to go in there, that person would die. That's where the presence of God dwelt among his people. And when the glory of God had appeared, it appeared like a smoke, like a thick haze. It was foggy, and just by sight, you couldn't really tell what it was. And then, much later, when Solomon built the temple, the tabernacle was mobile. They could pick it up, pack it up, move it to the next place, and unpack it. But when Solomon built a permanent temple, the glory of God appeared there as well. And when it appeared, it was that thick smoke, that fog, that haze. They knew what it was, but they couldn't really see it. It didn't have form of any kind. But then Jesus came. And when he came, he didn't come as a fog and he didn't come as smoke. He came as a human. And John said, I saw him with my own eyes. I heard him with my own ears. I hugged him with my own arms. He came to live in my neighborhood. God became a human. And he lived among people. And when Jesus came, he didn't look like the movies portray him. He wasn't blonde. He didn't have blue eyes. He wasn't American or European. He didn't speak with a British accent. He didn't have a halo over his head or a glowing heart in his chest. He looked like a regular Palestinian Jew. In fact, he looked so regular that people who grew up with him and knew him for 30 years didn't think of him as anything else but another regular guy who was a good person. His own brothers and sisters thought he was a regular guy because he just looked like a regular guy. And here's the mystery. Our great God, who always existed, became a human being, just like all of us human beings, except he never stopped being God. And he looked like a normal human being, and he spoke in a normal human being language, and he came to us. No more fog, no more thick curtain, no more separation. God came down to us. And the reason he did that was to die on the cross for our sins and completely pay for them forever. And 3 days later, Jesus rose again from the dead. Jesus is alive forever. C.S. Lewis put it this way: the Son of God became a man in order that men might become the sons of God. And like we talked about in Ed and Margot Go to New York City, you can become a child of God because of what Jesus did. But you must receive him. And here's how you receive him: by repenting and believing on Jesus. Have you ever repented and believed on Jesus? Guys, our memory verse this week is John 1:14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And remember, our big truth right now is, who is Jesus? The eternal Son of God who came in the flesh. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Big Truths. I'm having so much fun. Glad to be back in it. And I will see you guys next time. But until then, Mr. Forrest